Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Ben Parker, senior editor at the Bulwark, and I am so happy to be here talking with Rosa Brooks, former senior DoD official and law professor, about an essay you just had in the Bulwark, all about simulations you ran about what a Trump second term could be like. So we'll get to those simulations you ran in a minute. But first, I want to ask you about the simulations you did 4 years ago. Why did you run simulations before the 2020 election, and how did they turn out?
uh, Thanks, Ben. It's great to be here. Both these sets of simulations, the 2020 ones and these new ones, were probably sparked by the fact that I'm generally more paranoid than anybody else in any given room. Um, so I tend to be whatever issue other people are saying, oh, don't be ridiculous, that will be fine, is usually the one that I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, what if it's not? And in the fall of 2019, um, I remember very clearly sitting at a banquet dinner with a bunch of high powered lawyer types here in DC. And I said, what if Trump loses the election, but he just won't leave? And they said, oh, that's ridiculous. Don't be silly. The Secret Service would never let that happen. The military would never let that happen. And I remember thinking, wait, what? What are you talking about? What is this magic institutional safeguard that somehow springs into action? Because I don't think it exists. And that made me think, boy, nobody's thinking seriously about what happens if Trump loses the election and he just says, I won. I'm not leaving. Maybe I should bring some people together to think about exactly that. We did 4 large scale exercises, senior officials, former senior officials from both political parties. And they didn't go well. Indeed, they suggested that if Trump were to say, I didn't lose the election, as indeed we know he did, that it's not so easy to do anything about that. And the exercises suggested, at least, these are gaming, they're not predictions, they're
Yeah,
possible.
so tell us more about the format of the exercises, because of course you ran these things and they suggested there could be problems, and we ended up with January 6th. So
Yeah.
these are what, a bunch of people around a table. They're sort of games that people play. What's the format of them?
So I've never played Dungeons and Dragons myself, but I'm told by people who have that if you played Dungeons and Dragons, they're kind of similar. People are assigned roles. You might be playing Trump. I might be playing Biden. And we tried to put people in roles where they had significant real world experience. So if we were saying to somebody, you're going to play President Trump, we had people who had been in senior positions on Republican presidential campaigns, for instance. And we say, okay, it's the day after Election Day. Here's what just happened. Here's what we know so far in terms of the electoral college votes and so on. And here's what's still unknown. And okay, Trump, go. What do you do? And then the players essentially take turns. And Trump says, well, I don't accept that. I'm going to do whatever. And then Democrats in Congress, people playing those roles, or Joe Biden says, well, we're going to respond by doing such and such. And it goes back and forth like that. And I think the value of that kind of gaming, it's not real life. It's hypothetical. It's simulations, but it can push people beyond the, oh, that couldn't happen. Or, well, if that happened, we'll just do such and such, and force them to go, oh, okay, well, you just did such and such. And then the other side gets a vote. And here's what they did. Now what are you going to do? And you go, oh, hadn't thought of that. And all of our exercises in 2020 did end up with January 6th kinds of chaos and disarray.
So then what made you decide to do simulations again this spring to simulate a second Trump term?
So this time I wasn't planning to do anything. I thought, well, everybody knows what to be paranoid about now. I've spread my paranoia far and wide, and that's my goal in life. Nobody needs to be persuaded that the election could be disrupted. Nobody needs to be persuaded that the transition could be a disrupted period. But after a while, I kept running into people, and I would say things like, yeah, what if Trump just wins? He could just win. doesn't cheat. He just gets more votes, or he certainly gets more electoral college votes, and he just plain wins within the rules of the game. Like, what then? And people would kind of look at me and go, "Oh, well, let's just hope Biden wins." This is back in January or so, and I think, wait, that's not a plan. Let's just hope Biden wins is really not a plan. And back then, very much as now, this was obviously before the debate, before Biden withdrew, before the whole crisis with Biden's candidacy. The polls suggested it was basically a toss-up, which same as now. And I thought, if there's a coin flip chance that he actually wins, nobody should be just saying, let's hope it doesn't happen. We actually need to be thinking more seriously about, well, if he does win, what then? What does that look like? What, if anything, could slow or stop the most authoritarian things he says he's going to do?
So who this time participated in the simulations? And I should disclose that a number of the participants were affiliated with the Bulwark, and I was even sort of peripherally affiliated by helping some of those people prepare to play out their roles. So what kinds of people did you get to play senior Trump administration officials or senior Democrats or all these different roles that you simulated?
Some of them were actual former senior Trump administration officials, and senior Democrats and so forth. I mean, we had a former Democratic senator, we had a former Republican governor, we had the former acting attorney general under George W. Bush. We had similarly senior people who were heads of major civil society organizations, nonprofits, faith groups on the non-governmental side. But similarly, we tried as much as we could to make sure that the people cast in different roles were people who we reasonably thought had some meaningful insight into what real people in those roles would actually do in various circumstances. I must say, since this is the Bulwark, I will reveal that at one point, Bill Kristol was Donald Trump, and he was pretty terrifying Donald Trump.
Yeah, I can imagine that can get pretty scary. Readers of Morning
Having
Shots
so
will
much
know
fun.
how much. Yeah, readers of Morning Shots will know how much Bill likes to get in Trump's head,
Yes.
and also how deranged it can be. So one thing you mentioned in your article in the Bulwark is that some of the people who were most alarmed about what a second Trump administration could be were those former Trump administration officials who participated. So can you give us a little more detail about that, if possible? And also, why do you think that is? Do you think it was that the Trump administration people were over alarmed, or do you think it was that everyone else wasn't alarmed enough? And I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be.
Well, the old saying, a conservative as a liberal has been mugged by reality, which I, never thought was entirely fair, being a liberal myself. But there's probably some truth there, right? That part of what it is to be liberal is to be optimistic about humans, about institutions, about norms, to be a deep believer in the ability of a set of fairly abstract principles and cultural norms to govern human behavior. That people, if you just give them a chance, people will do the right thing. And I think that the folks who had been in Trump's orbit themselves, personally, as members of his administration or people who'd been around him, had a much clearer sense of, no, that's not how this guy works. That's not how the people around him work. So in the exercises, we kept seeing we called them the red team and the blue team. The red team being Team Trump, Team Autocrat, and the blue team not necessarily being Democrats, but being everyone who was concerned about Trump's autocratic plans. So that included many more moderate Republicans, former Republicans, uncomfortable people who couldn't figure out where they fit anymore. And over, the blue team was more likely to say things like, well, we'll go to court, and then there will be a court order, and he'll abide by the court order. And for a variety of reasons, the litigation strategy, I think, was proved ineffective in the games by and large. But one of those reasons was that the folks who'd been around Trump kept saying, he's not going to pay attention to a court order. Why do you think he's going to abide by a court order? You're going to be, as somebody put it, the blue team kept trying to bring a casserole to a gunfight. And so, yeah, I think it's the blue team was sort of reluctant to give up on the idea that if you just invoked these norms and so on, that people would pay attention and they wouldn't just make stuff up and they wouldn't do mean things like doxing people. And over, the blue team was disappointed in that set of assumptions.
So, what were some of the most worrying or troubling things that Team Trump tried to do, and what were the ones that they got away with, that they were actually able to implement or at least partially implement?
So I almost don't want to go into too much detail here because I don't want to put any ideas into their, tiny little heads. And on the one hand, I feel like, if I can think it, they can think it, and they're probably planning it. But on the other hand, there were a few things that certainly haven't made their way into publicly available materials that the Trump team tried in the simulations where we all thought, oh shit, that was really effective. We hope they're not thinking about that. So I'm not going to talk about those. But I will say, they're one of the things that they can do that nobody knows what to do about, and this is not a secret, they haven't figured out. We've had multiple administrations, including Democratic administrations and Democratic Congresses, have expanded executive branch emergency powers with virtually no restraints on them. Under the Insurrection Act, under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which is my favorite acronym of all time, IEPA, that allow presidents to essentially declare an emergency that the courts can't second guess them, Congress can't second guess them under these pieces of legislation. And the courts have held that the president has the power, just the discretion to just decide what counts as an insurrection, what counts as an emergency, and can then do, for instance, under the Insurrection Act, can use active duty military forces for domestic purposes, which is normally not something that is permissible under the Posse Comitatus Act. Can do things like freeze financial assets. There are a variety of other emergency powers that would allow the president to, the FCC could yank broadcast licenses from television stations that it didn't like what they were broadcasting. The president literally could shut the internet down or shut it down selectively. And what the president can do with those powers is limited only by logistics, in a sense, right? I mean, and here's actually one little tiny piece of not exactly good news, but slightly mitigating news. President Trump has, among other things, said he's going to, round up, detain, and then deport 15 million undocumented migrants. He has the legal authority to do that. He could use active duty military. He could federalize National Guard troops from every single state against the wills of their governors. If he wants to, he can do all those things. But logistically speaking, boy, we don't have the people, we don't have the places, we don't have the information. I mean, it's not doable. And in fact, it would cause total chaos.
It's a big undertaking. 15 million is a lot of people.
It's a huge undertaking. So the good news is he really can't do that, not because he lacks the legal authority or the desire, but just logistically, the money's not there, the facilities aren't there. The bad news is that if he decided to say, well, what the heck, I'm going to instill terror in people by I sure can do it with 15,000 people, or maybe 150, 1.5 million, maybe even. He could sure do that, and it would be really, really hard to do anything legally speaking. He's got that power.
So then I want to end on hopefully an optimistic note. What were the things the pro-democracy team did that were effective defenses for democracy, that effectively blunted some of these authoritarian impulses? And how much of it comes down to just politics, that it's harder to do things that are unpopular, that people can mobilize against, like mass deportations and, just sort of make them stop? Like, what were the effective pro-democracy strategies?
We didn't see a lot of effective pro-democracy strategies in the games, which was depressing. But the very failures, I think, pointed the way to what needs to be done. I mean, in the games, for instance, the civil society and out of power democratic politicians and so on really struggled to coordinate effectively about much of anything. They couldn't agree on messaging. They couldn't agree on, is it a good idea or a bad idea to encourage people to go out in the streets and protest? That there was a lot of internal division. I think that we have every reason to believe that Donald Trump is sensitive to public opinion, but the blue team didn't do a very good job figuring out how to mobilize that. But it does suggest that there is room between now and a potential Trump inauguration to get better at those things. The games did suggest that despite all those legal powers, that there are a wide range of ways that pro-democracy actors can slow and throw sand in the gears. By the Republicans deride this as the deep state, but this is actually patriotic civil servants doing their jobs by saying, "Wait a second, that order didn't make sense. I don't understand it. Wait a second, what's the authority for that? Wait a second, you might have immunity. I don't. And actually, I'm kind of concerned that that might not be lawful. And I want to find out. And we need to do more research on that." That those are all things that can slow things down. Institutionally minded civil servants, career people, military personnel who are abiding by all their lawful obligations, including the ones that say you have to pay attention. You swore an oath to the Constitution, and you don't just do whatever you're told. You say, "Whoa, hold on, let's make sure that's okay first." That helps. And the final thing, and this is kind of depressing. This isn't about stopping it. This is about, if you shift your mindset to thinking, if you live in Russia and Putin's coming down the road, you live in Hungary and Orban's coming down the road, what would you do to ensure that if you have to get through a period that could be 4 years, could be 20 years, could be 40 years of autocracy, that little flame of democracy is not extinguished? You want to set up the networks that can ensure people have cyber protection and legal assistance and potential physical protection if they need it, and communications help and so on. And you need to do that in advance, because if you wait until everybody is sort of isolated and alone, it's probably too late to do it. So it certainly suggests that if you're recognizing that if Trump wins, it could be a while and a bad while, but there is a lot we can do to kind of protect the people and organizations and communities that he's likely to target during that time if we start now. I think that was another big insight for me coming out of these exercises.
Well, I thought we were going to end on an optimistic note, but I guess not.
Sorry.
The good news is we're not there yet, and we still don't have to be. Thank you so much. Highly recommend the article on the Bulwark, Democracy Will Die a Slow, Quiet Death. We Simulated It, by Rosa Brooks. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ben.